Hi, hello everyone, Maxime here. So tomorrow, Phil Yule from Sega is going to present us like a brand new like NF Core initiative, which like is I think like super interesting, and I think it's like the logic like follow up of like what we did with NF Core. So, but I will let like Phil talk about like all that. So over to you, Phil.
Thank you, Maxime. Yeah, so today's talk is kind of an initial announcement of this new kind of program, which we've decided to call Special Interest Groups. And no live demos today, I'm afraid, just some boring slides. But I just want to sort of talk through what this is, where it came from, the thinking behind it. And sort of set the stage for more things you'll see coming out in the community in the coming kind of weeks. I'm very interested to hear kind of feedback from everybody, so I'd love it if we kind of have a good Q&A at the end, and so store up any questions you've got, and because this is the right time to ask them, it's kind of nice and early on. So let's go. This shouldn't be news to anyone, but the heart of NF Core is all about collaboration. Everything about NF Core is kind of focused on this, all about open science and open development and sharing and fostering collaboration in any way that we can. But NF Core itself doesn't kind of exist in a vacuum. And if you go to the NF Core communities or contributors page on the website, you'll see kind of logos of various different projects that we work with. I've put in a couple here, and there are many more. And these are all kind of existing initiatives that exist in their own right, and but we basically kind of overlap with NF Core. And many of these are consortia that have said that they will pledge to use NF Core pipelines in the work that they do. And that might be quite a small part of the work that they do, but it's kind of this overlap of merging of boundaries. And this has worked well. This has been the case pretty much since the start of NF Core, that we've had various kind of consortia and groups working together with us, and that's great. That's how we want to work. And they kind of typically share a bunch of common themes with what they're trying to achieve. Mostly these consortia want to standardize the analysis methods that they're using across multiple different research groups, maybe spread all around the world. But kind of with a standard type of input data. They want to harmonize the data formats and interoperability of that data that they're working with. They want to make sure that they are well positioned for downstream analysis in the future. So there might be, there's kind of this awareness that there'll be more data coming into a project at a future date. It's not just like kind of a one-off. And also that people may want to reanalyze or extend the data beyond the kind of life of the project. So there's this kind of desire to future-proof, basically, and kind of along these lines that these consortia want the methods that they're using to be stable well into the future for reproducible science, and also to kind of form the building blocks for the future. And importantly, that it'd be nice if these methods exist well beyond the scope of a current project. Most of these consortia will have funding for 2 years, for 4 years or so, and it'd be nice if these things that they're building can live on beyond that. Now, of course, here I'm talking about consortia, but all of this you can see overlaps with NF Core extremely well. I mean, we're all aiming for the same thing here. It's just with NF Core, we've sort of mostly come to it from a technical point of view, focusing on Nextflow, focusing on the data pipelines and the analysis types themselves. And the same kind of set of bullet points are coming in, but from a view of consortia who are working with specific types of data. So until now, kind of consortia and NF Core kind of worked alongside, but all the discussions for those consortia have kind of happened outside of NF Core, basically. But if we want these discussions and these methods and everything to kind of live on beyond consortia, or maybe for different consortia to work together or anything like that, where do they sit within NF Core? And kind of talking about this and realizing that there isn't really anywhere in NF Core for this discussion to happen currently. The community is structured technically around pipelines. We've got Slack channels for every single pipeline. Everything is kind of structured around these columns that support NF Core. And that's great, and that makes a lot of sense because we want people to get together to work on a specific pipeline, and that's why we've done it that way. But if you compare two different projects, so for example, on one of the earlier slides we had Bovreg, which is all about doing work on cows mostly, and you might be using the RNA-seq pipeline and the ChIP-seq pipeline and the ATAC-seq pipeline, and the way that those researchers are using those pipelines may be quite different to people working in human genetics. And so different projects can use the same set of pipelines in very different ways with different input parameters and different recommendations. And at the moment, we don't really have a space for community members working on different research interests to gather together. Okay, so this has kind of been a long time coming. We mostly sort of started this conversation off the back of the Eurofang project that we've been very involved with, which is now kind of the Bovreg project is coming to an end and they wanted to carry on. And we've been discussing it a little bit in the NF Core core team and steering groups. And then we had the NF Core steering and core team retreat the other week in Stockholm, and this is one of the things we discussed. We quite quickly decided to go for doing something. By far the most difficult thing was to decide what to call it. So just please accept my assurances that we have thought through every possible name for this thing. We have done votes, we've done tiebreakers, we could not come to a decision. And anyone who read the blog post will know what kind of state that put me in by the end of the week. But what we finally settled on is we're going to call these things special interest groups, and we'll try and avoid acronyms. So that's what they're now called as of a few days ago. So special interest groups, the kind of the overall overview then is that we've got these kind of columns of NF Core, these different pipelines, and then the special interest groups kind of work perpendicular to those and kind of span multiple pipelines within a specific group. And of course, any discussion can filter back and forth between pipelines and interest groups. So there should not be a silo of information. It should just be kind of a natural meeting place for people. We already have a pretty established method for how pipelines work. If you want to do a new pipeline, you go and propose it on the new pipelines channel. We'll set up a Slack channel for that pipeline to kind of centralize discussion. As soon as you create a repository and add it to NF Core, we get an NF Core web page or multiple web pages, README and usage and pipe parameters. Wherever possible, we encourage people to do bite-sized talks about their pipelines and associate that talk with a pipeline page. And kind of the other end of that circle then is if a pipeline ceases development, is kind of merged into another, or something else happens and there's no one working on it anymore, we archive that pipeline and keep it for future reference, and we can always unarchive it, but show that it's no longer active. So the rough plan with the special interest groups is just to kind of mirror this kind of system. It works well for pipelines. We think it should work well for interest groups as well. So we're going to have a similar kind of setup where we'll have a special Slack channel where people can come in and propose new interest groups, again with kind of a similar form. And then once approved, we will set up a Slack channel for that interest group, and there'll be a dedicated web page or multiple web pages. We would really like a special interest group to do a bite-sized talk. We might actually be slightly strict on this and actually say that's kind of a requirement for creating a new community, is it's kicked off with a bite-sized talk. And then of course, if communities kind of wind down or become inactive over time, we can always archive them. What should these communities do? What kind of things are we expecting? NF Core is very kind of grassroots, bottom up. As this is, so our approach to this and many other projects is we kind of have an idea, we've got some kind of expectations, but by and large, we are volunteer-led and we kind of expect people to do what is most useful for them. So these are not hard and fast at all. These are just kind of a rough outline of the kind of things that we're thinking about. Probably the most obvious is to try and write up documentations and come to agreements on what the best practices are for that community to work with that data type. So in my previous example, if working with domestic animal genomics, running RNA-seq in this way with these parameters makes sense. And you can imagine different pipelines, different communities, different sets of best practices. Once we have web pages set up, it'd be really nice to kind of cross-reference these. So anyone looking at the RNA-seq page can see the communities using this pipeline and go straight there and see how those communities are using that pipeline and vice versa. So again, kind of facilitate the exchange of information. Communities will often have relevant resources, documentation specific to that community. So we can kind of use those home pages as a place to centralize those. Some communities may or may not like to have regular meetings. And it'd be great to see some bite-sized talks and blog posts coming out. And maybe a slightly more kind of technical and far off one is we have talked about the idea of potentially having pipeline-specific configs specific to an interest group. So you could kind of have basically these kind of best practices codified in a way that's easy to use. What's really important is just as all NF core pipelines don't have any kind of institutional branding or anything like that, they're just NF core. The same will be true for these interest groups. So the interest group won't be called FANG or BOVREG. The interest group will be called Domestic Animal Genomics. And this is kind of to break down boundaries so that anyone can join. It doesn't matter if you're part of a pre-existing consortia that was kind of the root or the seed of this interest group. Anyone can join and everyone is welcome, no matter where you're working or what you're working on. Okay, so the next steps then, kind of on the NF core side of what's going to happen next, what you can expect is there'll be a blog post when I get around to writing it, so hopefully pretty soon, which will be much of the content I've just talked about, but kind of written down and maybe slightly more verbose and a little bit more specific. So that'll be the kind of the official announcement of this initiative. And with that, we'll probably try and set up some of the infrastructure around our first kind of initial group, which will be this one based off Eurofang, which will be Domestic Animal Genomics. And that will kind of give us a template to work off for everything else. Alongside that, we've got the blog post, but we'll also write up kind of the governance pages, if you like, with some of the stuff I talked about. You know, if an interest group is inactive for this long, it will be archived, and this is how you apply for it and all that kind of stuff. So it's all written in a place in the documentation, so it's very clear and transparent. We'll need to build up some infrastructure for how these new groups are added. So the Slack channels, the automation, GitHub projects, maintenance management, stuff like that. And once all of this is done and ready, we'll then kind of be ready for people from the community to come forward with proposals for new groups. Behind the scenes, we've got a list of maybe kind of 6 or 7 different ideas for potential interest groups already. So we'll go around those and see if the people behind them are interested in kind of kickstarting that. But also will be open just for anyone to come forward who thinks this is a good idea. Right, with that, I would love to kind of open the floor and see if anyone has any questions, comments, ideas, anything like that. Like I say, it'd be great to hear what everyone thinks of this and keen to see if anyone has ideas or suggestions.
So yes, I'll leave the possibility to anyone to unmute themselves. Yes, so people, you should be able to unmute them yourself if you have a question. Otherwise, if you're too shy to talk, you can always ask a question in the chat.
Yeah. And as long as that question is not a suggestion for a different name, so Becky, I'm gonna ignore your one now. Hopefully, people get on with special interest groups.
May I ask a question?
Hmm.
First of all, thanks for organizing this. I mean, it's a great idea, really. It's like a higher level about the pipelines, as far as I understand. And would it be of interest of these interest groups to develop some of the tools which are used in the pipelines, actually, but not really maintained by the original developer? You know, as for many of these bioinformatics tools, some PhD student develops something and then just abandons it, but they can be quite useful, but they are kind of a bit out of reach of pipeline development because they are quite specialized, let's say. And I'm guessing for some of the interest groups, it would actually be worth further maintaining or developing a fork of the original tool, for example. Or is it too much of a stretch?
So kind of my thinking with development is, going back to this slide, is that there'll be no one who's part of an interest group who's not also interested in some specific pipelines. So that there will be deliberate overlap. And so when it comes to any development work, my hope is that the interest groups will filter kind of into the pipeline groups, into the pipeline channels. And so if there's missing functionality or things that need to be developed, I'm hoping that the discussion will be sort of siphoned off from the interest group after a certain point and go into, like, say, the pipeline channel with a proposal of a new addition or a new kind of a new feature. When it comes to the extension of or maintenance of specific tools, I think it probably fits in the same category. It depends. Something that we've been talking a bit about recently, actually, in the graphics channel, is kind of visualizing how pipeline development changes hands over time. Exactly what you were just saying, how a PhD student can finish. But one of the lovely things about NF Core is that pipelines then can kind of change hands almost, because there's no kind of ownership like that. Hopefully also the same with special interest groups. So absolutely, if there's a project which looks like it was useful but could do with maintenance, then it would be great if people could pick that up. Whether those people are from special interest groups or not, I personally don't mind too much. It seems like a good way to filter in.
Cool, thanks.
Cool.
Yes, Adrien was just saying on the chat that he thinks it's a great initiative.
There.
Yeah, I maybe say something. So actually, we have doing kind of this special interest group already in BORFREC and in the Eurofund consortium, as Phil has explained. And if any of you are interested in knowing how this was and how was the dynamic of this group, I can you can just contact me and I can give you some feedback. And actually, regarding what the last point that we discussed, so actually in Eurofund it came up that there are people that need to develop a whole pipeline for doing their analysis. Other people that just need to change some features or that need to implement a feature that then was contributed back to the community. And in some other cases, they just were using the pipeline. So there is a whole range of scenarios.
Yeah.
Quick question: do we already have like channels open for the special interest groups?
As of right now, I haven't created any. I don't think anyone else has.
Yes, because I'm interested into joining the domestic animal genomics one.
Yeah, we'll be setting up all these pages and infrastructure over the kind of coming weeks.
Good.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And as always, we've got the bytesize channel on Slack, so pop any questions in there if something kind of comes to mind afterwards. And failing that, keep an eye out for a new blog post and a new announcement when everything goes live.
Thanks again, Phil.